There was a period in my life when I could walk into a room carrying nothing and walk out feeling like I had swallowed someone else's grief whole. I would sit across from someone at coffee, listening to their story, and by the time I left, their heaviness had moved into my body. I carried it home, I carried it to bed. I woke with it still lodged in my chest, and I had no idea how to put it down. I thought this was empathy. I thought this was what it meant to care. I did not yet know I was living inside an archetype that has destroyed healers for thousands of years. Welcome to Power and Myth. If you have ever felt like your entire identity was built around being the person others come to when they are broken, this video will name what is happening. If you have ever noticed that people only seek you out when they need something and vanish the moment you might need them, you are not imagining things, you are caught in what Jung called the wounded healer archetype, and if you do not learn to recognize it, it will consume you. The wounded healer is one of the 7 INFJ archetypes we explore here at Power and Myth. It is the pattern of the one whose deepest wound becomes the source of their gift. Chiron, the wounded centaur in Greek mythology, could heal everyone except himself. He carried an injury that would not heal, and from that perpetual pain, he developed the ability to heal others. This is beautiful in myth. In lived experience, it is often unbearable. Here is what the wounded healer trap looks like in practice. You become the person everyone confides in, not because you offer solutions necessarily, but because you can hold their pain without flinching. You have a strange tolerance for other people's darkness. You do not recoil, you do not judge. You sit there absorbing it, transmuting it, and somehow by the end of the conversation, they feel lighter and you feel heavier. This happens so often that you begin to structure your identity around it. You become the friend people call at 3 in the morning, the one who listens for hours, the one who never says, I cannot carry this right now. And here is where it becomes dangerous. You start to believe that your value is tied to your ability to heal, that if you are not helping someone, you are not worth knowing. The wounded healer begins to define themselves entirely by their capacity to absorb and transform others' suffering. Your wounds, which should have been the site of your own healing, become the tools you use to fix everyone else. You never get to rest, because the moment you stop being useful, you fear you will be abandoned. I watched this happen in my own life for years before I understood what it was. I had friends who only contacted me when they were in crisis. I had relationships where I was the eternal emotional support. But the moment I tried to express my own struggle, the dynamic shifted. Suddenly I was too much, too intense, too heavy. The same people who had leaned on me for months would vanish the moment I needed them to hold even a fraction of what I had been carrying. And instead of recognizing the imbalance, I blamed myself. I thought I was failing at being a good healer. I thought I needed to be stronger, more capable, more endlessly available. This is the trap. The wounded healer does not just give too much. They become incapable of receiving, because to receive you must admit that you have needs. And the wounded healer has organized their entire identity around being the one without needs, the one who is always strong enough to carry more. The moment you admit you are struggling, you feel like you are failing the only role you know how to play. What makes this particularly insidious for INFJs is that we are wired for this work. We do absorb emotion. We do sense what others are carrying, often before they have named it themselves. We do have an uncanny ability to hold space for pain. But there is a difference between having the gift of empathy and becoming a vessel for everyone else's unprocessed trauma. The wounded healer trap takes a natural INFJ strength and weaponizes it against you. It turns your sensitivity into a demand that you must always be available, always absorbing, always healing, even when you are the one who needs to be healed. I knew I was in the trap the day I realized I had not told anyone about my own pain in months. Not because I was fine, but because I had become so conditioned to being the listener that I no longer knew how to speak. I had trained everyone around me to see me as the strong one, the stable one, the one who never breaks, and the cost of that performance was that I had nowhere to put my own grief. It just accumulated inside me, unprocessed, unwitnessed, growing heavier every time I absorb someone else's pain on top of it. The wounded healer trap is not just about giving too much. It is about the collapse that happens when you finally realize you've been healing everyone except yourself. It is about waking up one day and discovering that you are so depleted, so emptied out that you can barely function, and the people you spent years helping are nowhere to be found because they never needed you. They needed what you could do for them. And the moment you stopped being able to perform that function, you became invisible. This is where the archetype begins to destroy you, because the wounded healer who cannot heal becomes worthless in their own eyes. You have built your entire sense of identity on being useful, on being needed, on absorbing others' pain. And when you no longer have the energy to do that, you feel like you have lost your reason for existing. This is not dramatic language. This is what it actually feels like to live inside this archetype without recognizing it. You become convinced that your value is conditional, that love is something you must earn by being endlessly available, that if you ever admit you are struggling, you will be abandoned. The escape I am going to map in this video is not about becoming less empathetic. It is not about shutting down or hardening yourself. It is about recognizing the difference between the gift of the wounded healer and the trap of the wounded healer. One is sustainable, one will break you. And every INFJ needs to know which one they are living. The first step in escaping the wounded healer trap is understanding why you fell into it in the first place. And this requires an uncomfortable honesty. For most INFJs, the wounded healer pattern begins in childhood. You learned early that the way to be valued was to be helpful, to be the one who did not add to the chaos, to be the one who could absorb tension and make things smoother for everyone else. Perhaps you grew up in a family where emotions were volatile and you learned to become the stabilizer. Perhaps you had an emotionally fragile parent and you became their confidant long before you should have been. Perhaps you were simply the sensitive one, and you learned that your sensitivity was acceptable only when it served others. Whatever the origin, the pattern was established, your pain was inconvenient, but your ability to manage others' pain was valued. And so you leaned into that. You became the helper, the listener, the one who could always be counted on. And it worked. People loved you for it. They needed you. And that need felt like love. But it was not love. It was reliance. And there is a difference. The shadow side of the wounded healer is this. You are not healing people. You are enabling them to avoid healing themselves. When you absorb someone's pain, you are performing a kind of emotional rescue that keeps them from ever sitting with their own discomfort long enough to process it. They offload it onto you, feel better, and walk away. They do not transform. They do not integrate. They learn that you are available to absorb what they do not want to feel. And you, in turn, become a repository for unprocessed emotion that was never yours to carry. This is the part most wounded healers do not want to hear. We like to believe we are helping. We like to believe that our empathy is noble, that our endless availability is generous. But if we are honest, we must admit that we are also participating in a dynamic that keeps us needed. The wounded healer often fears that if they stop rescuing people, they will no longer be loved. And so they perpetuate a cycle in which they are always required but never truly seen. Because the people who only come to you when they are broken do not know who you are when you are whole. They know the version of you that performs care. They do not know the version of you that needs care. I had to confront this in my own life. I had to ask myself why I kept attracting relationships in which I was the emotional support but never the supported. And the answer was difficult to accept. I was choosing people who needed me because being needed felt safer than being known. If someone needed me, I was there. I had a role. I knew what to do. But if someone simply wanted to know me without needing anything from me, I did not know how to be. I had so thoroughly identified with the wounded healer that I had no idea who I was outside of that role. This is the trap in its fullest form. You become so addicted to being needed that you lose the ability to simply be. You cannot rest, you cannot receive, you cannot admit vulnerability, because vulnerability would mean you are no longer the healer. You would become the wounded, and you have spent your entire life avoiding that position because you watched what happened to the wounded people around you. They were left. They were too much. They were a burden, and you vowed you would never be a burden. So you became the one who carries burdens instead, and you never put them down. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but for the wounded healer, becoming who you truly are requires dismantling the identity you have spent years building. It requires admitting that you have needs, that you have limits, that you are not, in fact, endlessly capable of absorbing more. And this admission feels like death, because if you are not the healer, who are you? The answer is you are a person, not a function, not a role, not a repository for others' unprocessed pain. A person with your own wounds, your own needs, your own limits. And the people who truly love you will not disappear when you admit this, but the people who only needed you will. And that is the test. The wounded healer must be willing to lose the people who only loved them for what they could provide. This is the most painful part of the escape, because it often means losing relationships you thought were central to your life. I lost friendships when I stopped being endlessly available. I set boundaries, and people who had relied on me for years suddenly became cold. They accused me of changing, of becoming selfish, of no longer being the person they knew. And they were right. I was no longer the person they knew, because the person they knew was not a whole person. It was a role I had been performing, and I could not perform it anymore without breaking. This is the shadow work of the wounded healer. You must grieve the version of yourself that you thought made you lovable. You must confront the fact that you have been complicit in relationships that were never reciprocal. You must admit that you have been so busy healing everyone else that you have abandoned yourself. And then you must begin the work of reclaiming your own life. To transition out of the wounded healer trap often moves you into another archetype entirely. You may become the exile for a time, the one who is outside the systems of care you used to inhabit. You may find yourself alone in a way you have never been alone before, because the people who needed you are gone, and you have not yet found the people who will simply be with you. This period feels like wandering in a wilderness, but it is necessary, because you cannot build a new identity on the foundation of the old one. You must let the wounded healer die before you can discover who you are beyond it. There is a moment in every wounded healer's journey when they realize they have been giving from an empty well, that they have been pouring out and out and out, and nothing has been pouring back in. And the rage that comes with this realization is appropriate. You have every right to be angry. You have been betrayed by a dynamic you thought was love. You have been used by people who called it friendship, and you have betrayed yourself by allowing it. This anger is not something to be ashamed of. It is the fire that will burn away the old pattern and make space for something new. But anger alone will not free you. The wounded healer must also learn to grieve, to mourn the years spent absorbing others' pain, to mourn the relationships that were never reciprocal, to mourn the version of yourself that believed your value was conditional on your usefulness. This grief is deep, it is old, and it must be felt before you can move through it. The escape from the wounded healer trap is not about rejecting empathy. It is not about becoming cold or closed. It is about reclaiming your gift without letting it consume you. And this requires a fundamental shift in how you understand your role in others' lives. You are not responsible for healing anyone. You never were. The wounded healer believes they must save people. But the truth is, you cannot save anyone who is not ready to save themselves. Your empathy, your insight, your ability to hold space, these are gifts, but they are not obligations. You are allowed to offer them when you have the capacity and to withhold them when you do not. Your worth is not determined by how much pain you can absorb. It is inherent. It exists whether you are helping someone or not. This is the shift that changes everything. When you stop believing that love is something you must earn by being useful, you begin to attract different kinds of relationships. You start to find people who want to know you, not just what you can do for them. You start to experience reciprocity, and reciprocity feels strange at first because you are not used to receiving. You are not used to someone else holding space for you, but this is what actual connection looks like. Not one person perpetually giving and the other perpetually taking, but two people meeting each other in their wholeness, their brokenness, their humanity. I escaped the wounded healer trap by learning to say no, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I learned to recognize when someone was asking me to carry something that wasn't mine to carry. I learned to notice when I was being contacted only when someone needed something. And I learned to let those relationships go. It was painful, it was lonely, but it was necessary because I could not build a life that honoured my own needs whilst perpetuating dynamics that ignored them. The gift of the wounded healer does not disappear when you escape the trap. It transforms. You still have the ability to hold space for pain, you still have the capacity for deep empathy, but now you wield it with discernment. You offer it to people who are genuinely doing their own work, not to those who use you as an emotional dumping ground. You recognize that true healing happens when someone sits with their own pain long enough to integrate it. And your role is not to take that pain away, it is to witness it, to reflect it back, to help them name it, but not to carry it for them. This is what sustainable empathy looks like. You remain sensitive, you remain perceptive, but you also remain boundaried. You know when to engage and when to step back. You know the difference between supporting someone's growth and enabling their avoidance. And you stop mistaking depletion for virtue. The wounded healer who gives until they break is not noble. They are simply broken, and a broken healer cannot heal anyone, least of all themselves. There is an archetype that exists beyond the wounded healer. It is the healer who has healed themselves first, the one who has integrated their own shadow, processed their own pain, and learned to exist as a whole person rather than a function. This healer is not less empathetic. They are more discerning. They do not take on everyone's suffering. They help people carry their own. And this, strangely, is more effective. Because when you stop rescuing people, you force them to develop their own capacity for resilience. And that is the only kind of healing that lasts. I am not fully free of the wounded healer pattern. I still feel the pull. I still have moments where I want to absorb someone's pain just to make it stop. But now I recognize the impulse. I see it for what it is. And I choose differently. I ask myself, is this mine to carry? Will carrying this serve them? Or will it simply allow them to avoid their own work? Am I giving from fullness or from the fear that I will be unloved if I do not give? These questions have saved me more times than I can count. If you are currently trapped in the wounded healer pattern, you already know it. You feel it in the exhaustion that never lifts, in the friendships that only go one way, in the growing resentment that you cannot express because you are supposed to be the one who never needs anything. And if that is where you are, I want you to know this. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to put down what you have been carrying. You are allowed to admit that you have needs. And the people who genuinely love you will not leave when you do. But the people who only needed you will. And that is not a loss. That is clarity. The INFJ's journey through the wounded healer archetype is not unique to you, though it feels that way. Healers have been walking this path for thousands of years. Chiron carried his wound for eternity, but you do not have to. You can learn from the wound without being destroyed by it. You can offer your gift without sacrificing yourself. And you can build a life in which you are valued not for what you can give, but for who you are. This is what we explore here at Power and Myth. Not just the archetypes we live by, but the way we can transform them. If this video names something you have been carrying in silence, I want to hear which moment landed hardest. Tell me in the comments. Have you recognized the wounded healer trap in your own life? Are you still in it, or have you begun to escape? And if you want to continue exploring the archetypal territory of being an INFJ, subscribe. You are part of something here. Until next time, find your power, know your myth,